We don't spend a lot of time introducing our plenary speakers because you have their bios and their photos and stuff in your conference notebook. But tonight I'd like to take an extra moment or two to tell you a little bit about Bill Shireman. Now, I've never met Bill before tonight, but I've read a lot about him, and I've talked to people who know him, and I got to tell you, I suspect you're going to be as impressed as I am. Bill is the president and the CEO of the Future 500, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to forging relationships between corporations and NGOs around the world. Now, think about it this way. He's placing himself on a daily basis between people who hate each other, between organizations that are very much into confrontation as opposed to collaboration, and he tries to, rechannel that energy into collaborative types of efforts. So he works to unite businesses and NGO leaders behind genuine common ground solutions to global warming, deforestation, resource depletion, political repression, human rights violations, things like that. All the things that our clients are very, very much interested in. So we are extraordinarily happy that Bill is able to join us this evening. Now, as I said earlier, when it comes to the point where he's ready to take questions, I want people who want to ask a question to prepare a succinctly worded question, to queue up at the mics in the middle of the room, and Bill will facilitate that from the podium here. So I'm truly pleased and honored to bring Bill Shireman up on the stage. Please help me welcome him to SRI in the Rockies.
Thank you, everyone. It is truly an honor to be here with you, and I appreciate the invitation to share ideas and notes with you all. I hope that you will find value in what we have to talk about beginning tonight. 2 years ago, you probably remember this, the voters, in their wisdom, ended 8 years of George W. Bush and brought into office a new leader who was sympathetic to many of the issues that people in this room have dedicated their lives to advancing. 2 weeks and 2 days ago, the voters, in their continually evolving wisdom, repudiated the repudiators, changed the change agents, brought 100 new folks into the U.S. Congress, 80 of them Republicans, 60 vote increase in Republican share in the Congress, and cast something of a pall, I would say, over the sustainability community, a sense of anger and frustration, a sense that we had this magical opportunity for the past 2 years, but we were not able to fully capitalize on that opportunity. Well, I am here to say that I am not depressed at the results on November 2nd. I am not defeated. I am not disillusioned. And I doubt very much that many of you are either. I am not pessimistic about the future of this movement. I am not particularly optimistic either. But I am determined, and I continue to be a realistic idealist. And I believe that these next 2 to 4 years can be a time during which we can achieve some of the objectives of the sustainability movement that have eluded us to this point. The first 3 opportunities that I want to talk about, and these are opportunities that I believe we have a special ability to put into place, even with, and in some cases because, we have had this political transformation in the last 2 weeks. Number 1, we believe that we can put a price on carbon, that we can do it in a bipartisan way that brings together an extraordinary range of supporters. Number 2, in the area of water, we have the opportunity, an historic opportunity, to cut some of the Farm Bill subsidies that have been central to the water consumption and pollution problems that we have faced over the past generation. Number 3, in the area of resources, we can begin to internalize the environmental costs of resource consumption and drive an economy that continuously produces more value with less consumption, sustainable consumption. These are three opportunities, and there are many more. I use these as examples, but these are three opportunities that are available to us because of two realities about how we have the capacity to change society. Number one, we have allies in places that we have never imagined. People and organizations that are politically and socially and in the marketplace positioned to advance our objectives over the edge to the point where we can bring these into being. And second, we have power that we have never used. We have sources of political power, political strategy that we have never systematically as a movement put into place in any kind of continuing way. And I would like to suggest that the strategies that we've left on the table, in so many cases, it's time for us to pick those strategies up and begin to put them into place. I was reminded of this 2 years ago when I went to Washington, D.C. Shortly after, it was about a year and a half ago actually, shortly after the Obama administration went into office. And I went to two conferences that happened on the same day, across town in Washington, D.C. One was the Power Shift Conference. 12,000 young people. It was enormously gratifying to walk into this enormous room with 12,000 young people who were dedicated to putting a price on carbon, to protecting the environment, to protecting the climate. And these folks were enthusiastic beyond measure. They knew that Barack Obama was now president and that he was going to usher in a new era of change in which their objectives could be realized. I was a little concerned about the sense of overconfidence that seemed to be in the room and the sense of kind of a worshipping mentality that I thought not just the folks in that room, but many felt toward this new administration, which was entering into the political arena at a very difficult time with 8 years of difficulties placed on its plate. But I was particularly concerned when I went across town to this conference. This is the Conservative Political Action Conference. 9,000, again, mostly young people, extraordinarily optimistic about their movement. They were not dissuaded, they were not depressed, they were not diminished in any way by the election of Barack Obama as a president. They were energized, and they were ready to go. And they brought not just enthusiasm, they brought strategies. They brought campaign toolkits. They brought plans that they were going to disseminate around the country. And their determination was to destroy this young presidency as soon as they could, to really destroy it. It was extraordinary. Now, I am not a demonizer, and I recognize that in every group, including that room, there are many people often finding it difficult to raise their objections in a community, but who support the very best objectives in terms of social responsibility and accountability. So I know we had allies there. I know we did, and I met some of them. But that was the tenor of that conference. It was there that I heard first the term cap and tax, where Niger Innis from Congress on Racial Equality declared that cap and tax must be swept into the ash heap of history, just as Jim Crow was, to the cheers of thousands in the audience. And I came out of that, went back to the Power Shift Conference just thinking, oh my gosh, these folks do not know what is about to hit them. And I frankly don't blame President Obama for the difficulties that have happened since. I recognize there are many in the progressive community that feel let down by this administration, but I think that the responsibility has to come back to us individually and collectively to not just be enthusiastic and driven and committed to our causes, but also to apply strategy to advance the objectives that we seek. And in the spirit that this conference brings, to do so with respect toward our adversaries, because it's in those adversaries that we will find our most important allies. Here's what is happening in today's society, today's highly polarized society. When change happens, and we are at a point of change, a point of transition, a point of transformation, when change happens, there is a natural response of fear on the part of many people in the society, those who feel that they don't have control of that change. People become afraid. Their stability is at risk. What they know, what is commonplace to them, is at risk. And when they become fearful, they begin to look for a source of that fear. Who is it that is causing this change? And they become angry toward that organization, that change, that new cultural element. And it's at that point that they are very vulnerable to demagogues that will come in and focus their hate on a presumed political target. And so you have a variety of targets. Depending on the hate group involved, it may be Republicans that you hate, or Christians, or gays, or liberals, or corporations, or Democrats. These are all victims of hatred by different groups. And so here's what happened. Here's the dynamic. You have a guy who comes into office on a platform of change. And that change may not be the kind of change that you've envisioned, or he may not look quite like the change agent that you were expecting, or he may not be using the same words that you were expecting, and you become fearful. People become fearful. And then they blame the source of that change, and others come in and focus that anger toward that hated individual, the source of the problem. Now, this is something that is not unique to the right. The right happens to be better at it right now, but there are certainly those within our own movement, and we understand the role that demonization plays in the process of social change. And I don't diminish the importance of it as an aspect, as an element of social change. But we have it on both sides. And we do it in the corporate community as well. I used to be head of an environmental lobby, and I know from experience, we used to do direct mail fundraising, millions of direct mail pieces we would send out, and they were our bread and butter. And we tested negative messages, positive messages, evil corporation, good ally. Evil corporation makes money. Good ally loses money. You can't run an organization without having some designated enemies and a time limit at which point they will destroy all that you stand for. But it's not the reality. There's a certain mythology around this. It's just as important for us to have our eye out for heroes and potential heroes, and to recognize that in every company, no matter how objectionable its practices you may find, there are internal heroes, internal change agents, who want to change either the company or perhaps the industry that it's a part of, or the business model on which the company and industry are built. So I want to tell a story about how I learned a little bit more about how to do this, how to find allies in unexpected places, and how to use power. I used to say you would buy houses using other people's money, OPM. There's also a way to drive political change using other people's power, harnessing the power that's already out there and bringing it together with your own. So, story number one, hero number one. This is Bill Coors. Bill Coors, this was a couple of decades ago, I'm sorry to say. Bill was probably in his mid-70s. He's now about 96. I was the head of an environmental lobby in California. We were pushing for a bottle bill. We were pushing for one of those simple laws that puts a nickel deposit on beer and soft drink cans and bottles to bring them back. I thought it was a really good idea, and that was my charge. I had been brought in to lead this group after we ran an unsuccessful initiative campaign in the state of California, and the voters said no. And so it was my job to come back to the organization, pay off this enormous debt from our campaign, and then go back to the legislature and say, can you please pass a bottle bill? I know the public just said no, but we'd like you to do it instead now. And they said no. So I thought, well, what strategy should we follow? And most of my allies said, well, we got to generate more letters and more phone calls and more pressure and beat up the bad guys a little bit more. But we thought maybe we try something a little different. So I started to call the heads of the companies that had been our opponents, heads of the companies that had contributed to the campaign against us. And lo and behold, they were kind of interested in talking to me because, of course, I had been characterized as a demon to them, and so they wanted to meet this demon. And Bill Coors was one of the most gracious that I called. He said I was the first environmentalist to actually call him just to have a conversation, just to share ideas. And he invited me out to Golden, Colorado. Now, this is Bill Coors. Coors had a reputation because of Bill's brother, Joe, who was a co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, of being a conservative company. And Bill was of a different mindset, but he had been painted with that same brush. So I'm in the room with Bill Coors, icon of the conservative movement, at least according to the liberal movement. And he's sharing with me his ideas for how to pass a bottle bill. And I'm thinking, this is a little surreal. Why is this guy who was, a contributor against, why is he for this? And he said that he had come up with this idea called a closed-loop system. He wanted to get his containers back. He wanted 100% recycling. He had invented the aluminum can, actually, because it was a recyclable product. And he had kind of force-fed it into the industry because he believed in it. And he thought it has some intrinsic value. It'll kind of pick itself up off the ground, which indeed was a good part of the truth. So he wanted to establish a system. But he said, when he suggested that in a particular state, the retailers came out of the woodwork to tell him, Bill, no, we don't want those containers potentially coming back through our stores. And the implicit threat was, as the number 3 brand, you might not end up on our store shelves if you persist in proposing this. So that alerted me to a power dynamic within that set of industries, which was the retailers hold the key. The retailers are the ones that are at the top of the supply chain. They are the biggest concentrated buyers of that product and every product, and they have the capacity to, when it's important to them, to dictate the political needs that their suppliers need also to advance. So I talked to this guy. This is Chuck Collings, CEO of the number 3 chain in California at the time. He was the head of the California Grocers Association. He was also a leader in the religious right movement. So a social conservative, a strong social conservative who testified, who was quite visible. Now, people had told me before I talked to Bill Coors, don't talk to Coors, it's all greenwashing, they're not really supportive of any of this stuff, don't trust them, don't step over that line. And they said the same thing about Chuck Collings. But when I talked to Chuck, he's a man of high integrity. He may have had a set of beliefs that were very different from my own, but he was a man of integrity. And he told me that he was ashamed of the way that his side had defeated us in the initiative campaign, that they had not played fairly, that they had not been honest, and that he would rather be on our side. And if we could help him solve his problem, if we could devise an approach to the bottle bill that didn't require that all these containers go back through his stores, that he would support us, and he would make sure that others supported us as well. So we took that as a pledge. And we went forward, and we launched a new initiative campaign to put a bottle bill on the ballot, but we simultaneously began a series of negotiations with the retailers heavily involved. And we got the retailers at the table, beer companies at the table, the soft drink companies at the table, the packaging interests at the table, and all agreed on a basic model of a better bottle bill for California. We were in the process of developing this when August Bush, the head of Anheuser-Busch, discovered what was happening in California and that there was some alliance with the evil environmentalists that was emerging there. And he sent his folks out, the general counsels, to shut this down. And said, you can have we'll give you a litter tax, 1/10 of a penny per container. We'll put it in a fund. We'll pay people to go clean up litter. We're not going to do any of this bottle bill stuff. So I called Chuck Collings, and Chuck called the heads of Safeway and Lucky, and together they all called August Bush. And they said, August, we really like to sell your beer. And we'd really like you to be at the table with the environmentalists and work out a deal in California so that we can have a better bottle bill and get this issue behind us. And August Bush became our best friend at that point. He came in, the entire... So this is the dynamic that was at work there. You have the beverage industry, and most of the time, the environmental community had focused our attention on the beverage community, the ones that we thought were, the source of the problem. But once we learned the dynamic that the beverage industry was really dependent on the retail industry, we formed the alliance with the retail industry, and that spread into an alliance with the beverage industry. And once we had them all aboard, then the packaging materials industries all came aboard very willingly, because they all wanted to be part of the solution, and they wanted to make sure that they were at the table, not on the table, as they say. So the companies with influence over Democrats went to the Democrats in the legislature. The companies that had influence over the Republicans went to the Republicans in the legislature. The labor unions did their job. We all did our job. And the result was choreographed down to the final vote. We won with just the number of votes we needed, with just the number of Republicans we needed, not because we were lucky, but because that was the plan. So we won. And we brought into being, thank you very much. And the result of that was not just passage of a bottle bill, but passage of a better bottle bill, a fundamentally better approach that was much less costly than the one that we had advocated in the first place. In the time since, 250 billion cans and bottles have been recycled. $5 billion has been saved by that system compared to the cost of the alternate. 80% lower cost and an 80%, over 80%, it's now 85% recycling rate. Unprecedented to have that kind of recycling. And it's been emulated by other laws in the state for computers, for tires, for motor oil, and other materials. But it still has its issues, and it can be simpler, it can be better. And there's some ways I want to talk about in a minute to potentially make that the case, not in California perhaps, but in other states. A second story. A few years ago, I got a call from executives at Mitsubishi Electric and Mitsubishi Motors, and they said, there are these activists from this group called Rainforest Action Network, and they are scaling our buildings, and they are entering into our auto shows, and they're locking themselves to the steering wheels of our cars, and they're saying that we are the world's worst destroyer of rainforests. And we don't understand what this is about, because we're an auto company, an electronics company. What is this all about? So we went down and visited with the executives of Mitsubishi Motors, Mitsubishi Electric, and began an odyssey which led to really an extraordinary outcome. Not just the direct outcome, but the side effect outcomes of this were really quite remarkable. We brought together these two folks. Tachi Kiyuchi was the chairman and CEO of Mitsubishi Electric here in the United States. Randy Hayes, the founder of Rainforest Action Network. First time we got them together, they couldn't look each other in the eye because each had demonized the other so much. It was so uncomfortable. But before we even entered into this, Tachi had taken it upon himself to visit the rainforest. He was getting all this pressure. He said, I should know something about the rainforest. So we went to Malaysia, Borneo, and visited the rainforest and began to get an understanding of what the issues were. And he began to become dedicated to environmental sustainability, and that dedication continues to this day. Ultimately, we brought these folks together, and they were able to really form a trusting relationship and a team with one another. And in the course of that, we identified 10 things that the Mitsubishi companies could do that were not on the demand list from Rainforest Action Network, but they were 10 things that the companies could do that would be neutral or good for their companies, and that would systematically drive down non-sustainable harvesting. One of those was to adopt a procurement preference for no old-growth timber or paper products. So Mitsubishi Motors, Mitsubishi Electric became the first two companies to sign on. And Rainforest Action Network duly followed that up by working with us and signing on 400 other companies to the same commitment. Those companies were willing to sign on because these two major names had already set the precedent to do it. And the combined force of 400 companies in North America all committing to not buy old-growth, clear-cut sourced timber and paper products began to change the demand for timber and paper products in North America. And so then we had a very interesting thing happen. We have the forest buyers. Again, it's the top of the supply chain. It's the buyers that were exhibiting the influence, not the forest products companies who were the ones that Rainforest Action Network and others had been targeting. Now we were looking for the first time at the buyers. Now we started to hear from some of these other companies, Macmillan Bloedel, specifically the largest timber products company in Canada. And they said, you did this deal, they called Tachi, they called me, you did this deal between Mitsubishi and Rainforest Action Network. We're, subject to the same criticism. Do you think there's anything that we could do? And so they opened up, had a meeting with Tachi and myself, their senior executives. A couple months later, we organized a conference in order to bring together executives from the company, Sierra Club, Rainforest Action Network, Clayoquot Sound, Rainforest Action, others, in order to talk about possible solutions. And over the course of a weekend, we came forward with a new method of a new sustainable harvesting practice set that would give Macmillan Bloedel an advantage in this new marketplace for sustainable timber, and that would give the environmentalists the victory that they needed. And so what happened as a consequence of that, the head of Rainforest Action Network called the biggest step forward in North American forest protection in 17 years, and the head of the forestry company called the future of forestry. It didn't just change Macmillan Bloedel. It changed them, but it also changed every one of their competitors. Each competitor of the company now had to come forward with its own version of sustainably harvested timber. And they all came up with different plans based on their different places in the market. So the effects continued to roll through the market. And it wasn't too long before we had the largest buyers of timber products, Home Depot and Lowe's. Home Depot was the next target for Rainforest Action Network. They were the negative target, and Lowe's was the quiet, behind-the-scenes target. And they, too, adopted these procurement specifications, and that helped lead to certification of sustainable forestry. That's what happens when we have the capacity to look at the top of the supply chain and forge a strategy that recognizes that not all companies are the same, that there are interplays between those companies, and that by forging the right alliances with the right folks at the right time, we can accomplish a lot. And here are three of the things that I think we can accomplish in the next 3 years. But again, I mention these as examples where we believe the politics are right. We believe that there is support on the left, on the right, in the center, and among some of the key industries and influencers that can bring these changes into being. A price on carbon, reform of the Farm Bill, and extended producer responsibility. So, the fourth opportunity is one that I'm calling RISA, Retail Industry Stakeholder Alliance. It is a non-existent organization, but it's one that I wanted to suggest to the folks in this room should be brought into being, because it's the missing piece in this, something that really needs to be, and we would be happy if it existed. Here's opportunity number one, price on carbon. Here are the three alliances that have to come together for us to win a price on carbon. Number one, the NGOs and SRIs. What we hear constantly from companies and from the change agents within those companies that are trying to make good things happen is we need the SRI and NGO community to come to us with a unified ask. We understand that there's differences of opinion and ideology between every group, but if they can identify areas of common ground just between the groups, 3 sentences that they can, in a unified way, ask us to support, it'll be so much easier for us to sell that internally. We can't sell 30 different positions internally, but we can sell one position supported by 30 significant organizations. So that's what we need, number one. For a price on carbon, we need a unified ask from the SRI community. Number two, we need retailer and brand support, because the Walmart effect is compelling here. When the retailers decide to do something, everyone else falls in line. And then we need Republicans. We need the Nixon and China effect. We need a selection of Republicans. We're not going to get a majority, but we need a set of Republicans, 10%, 15% of the Republicans to support us in this, and that can happen. For the last year and a half, we have felt that it was unlikely that the cap-and-trade bill would pass through Congress, and so we've been working on what we've called the Plan B alliance. and working behind the scenes to try to bring folks together behind a set of principles that could unify the movement. And there are two principles that we've found on the price on carbon arena that bring together a surprisingly broad set of stakeholders who all want to get this done. The number one is, of course, a price on carbon. And that price on carbon is a price on carbon that is sufficient to drive down demand for carbon to ultimately reach that 75 or 80% reduction that's needed by 2050. So a price on carbon that's sufficient to meet the scientific need. And second, a dividend or tax reduction to consumers, a path to give most or all of those monies back to consumers in the form of lower payroll taxes or an Alaska-style dividend check. Those are the two principles that bring together a surprising alliance. Here's the potential alliance that we think can be brought together based on the stakeholders that we've talked to. Number one, we need, of course, a unified ask. And these are some of the groups. Almost all these groups have already endorsed those principles. About 100 groups have already endorsed those principles. You can see them on our website, future500.org, if you'd like. We need, first, these are the things we have to check or X off. We need, for example, to check off a top 10 brand. Somebody, I don't know. We need to target a top 5 retailer. And I think we need to put an X on a non-coal energy company. These are the three types of companies that we need to come aboard in order to pass the price on carbon. So number one, we already have this wonderful alliance called Series BICEP. I don't know if Ann Kelly is in the room here, but the great work that Series BICEP has done to bring together companies on behalf of a really leadership level commitment on climate. And Sarah Severin at Nike has been heroic as well in driving that. So we have 1/3 of it in place. We need, and Target has recently joined BICEP, so another good sign. We need a top 5 retailer, maybe 2 of them. We could put 2 on the wall. Mark. And we need, of course, a non-coal energy leader. And there's a sense within the environmental community and the social responsibility community that the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry is just, uniformly opposed to anything that would help to protect climate. But internally, that is not the case. There are many companies, I would hazard to say most of the companies in the energy industry would like to see a price on carbon. They face difficulties in getting there, but they'd like to see a price on carbon, and they will do certain models on that, like the ones that we've suggested. And through the combination of their political power and their marketplace power, we can begin to change the chambers of commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers. We can at least open them up. Within the chamber, I know of people there who support a carbon tax shift. Internally, they support a carbon tax shift. They need the gentle alliance that can come together to put them in the position to be able to come public on that. So we have our allies within. And we need allies to be able to go to the Republican leadership to say, we don't need you to champion this, but we do need you to allow your members to support what's right. And that's what we expect. Here's one of those people. Here's one of my personal heroes right now. This is Congressman Bob Inglis, a Republican from South Carolina, a conservative Republican, 93% conservative voting record on the Americans for Conservative Action, or whatever it is. Bob is dedicated to putting a price on carbon. He is so dedicated in one of the most conservative districts in the country that he advocated and sponsored a carbon tax law this last session. And he was rewarded by his constituents who voted him out in the primary in the face of a Tea Party opposition. So he has fallen on his sword. He has taken paid the ultimate political price. But he is still dedicated to this objective, and he wants to continue to work to shift the Republican Party to understand that climate is a real issue and that we need to have a price on carbon. So he's one of my heroes, and I expect him to continue in this movement. And then there's George Shultz, you all know, There is no Republican that has more solid credentials than George Shultz, the chairman of the No on 23 campaign in California. So we have leadership individuals, and we have a variety of other Republicans that are willing to come forward and say, there's economists and conservative politicians that are willing to say that we need to have a price on carbon. We need it to enhance national security. We need it to cut taxes on jobs. We need it so that we stop subsidizing pollution. We need it so that we can pay dividends to consumers. That's why Republicans can support this. And we think there are 10 to 12 GOP senators that are prospects for this. These are 9 of them. But we think that these can be won. But what it will take is that alliance that I talked about. We need to have a unified ask by the SRI community and the NGO community so that we can build a coalition and secure the collateral victories along the way, because none of these campaigns is only aimed at, or certainly should not be, only aimed at the stated objective of price on carbon, et cetera. All of these can lead to collateral victories along the way at the state level and in the marketplace, where we can begin to turn the tide against our consumption of coal and toward cleaner sources of fuel for the future. So we need to build that coalition, and we need to secure those collateral victories so that in the year 2013, we can go to Congress once again with a better proposal, more broadly supported, without selling out to the coal sector, that we can actually pass. That's what we're looking for, and we believe that it is doable. But the people in this room are the ones who have the power to make it happen by understanding the strategy that can lead to that objective. Thank you. We see other opportunities, and we see opportunities because let me tell you a little bit about Future 500, because I neglected to put that in the slide set, which is a terrible, oversight, I guess. But Future 500 is a nonprofit. We were formed 15 years ago with the express purpose of bringing together corporations and activist groups from the left, from the right, to find systemic solutions to the problems that divide them. Very often the issues that divide these groups are surface level issues where the conflict is inevitable. But if you can delve down and understand the systemic reason that there is a conflict, those folks can be brought together. And that's what we look for. We look for the systemic root cause of the conflict. Why are these folks at odds with one another? It's not just that there's demons and good guys. It's that there are real, genuine interests, and institutional interests are legitimate interests just like others are. So, another opportunity, extended producer responsibility. EPR is a system that shifts waste and recycling costs from households to producers. Government sets the targets, but producers finance the system, and they manage the system by which these funds are then paid over to recyclers, municipalities, anyone that helps to solve the problem. So it's a way of shifting those costs. We have libertarians that like this idea because it's all about making sure that people are responsible for the costs that they actually impose. This is a good opportunity, so the advocates of EPR say, and some advocates of climate protection say as well, that in the states, not necessarily in some of the traditional environmental states, but in some of the states that are becoming more environmental, there's a dedication and an interest in recycling, and they want to see this happen. And about 44% of our climate footprint, carbon footprint as a nation, is tied up in our products and our packages. So this is a way to get at the problem at a state level if we can't do anything at the federal level. What needs to come together? These are the odd bedfellows that we think can come together for an EPR system. Bobby Kennedy and NRDC are recently activated on this, and Bobby is going to be organizing probably some of the people in this room, and companies and funders and others to come together in the first quarter of next year to try to make this happen. Funder alliances are coming together to prioritize sustainable consumption as an area of focus, and extended producer responsibility is a prime opportunity to drive sustainable consumption. These foundations are convening various groups to talk about how to do that. And you have the grassroots and EPR folks that you see here. I want to just point out As You Sow and Leslie Lowe over here. I didn't give her warning in advance, and Andy Behar from As You Sow, but they are really leaders in this work to establish extended producer responsibility. So I would invite you to contact them if you're interested in helping on this. These groups need to come together. The food and beverage, why would the food and beverage industry want to come together behind this? Well, the reason that they're interested in this, and not all of them are supportive, but two key companies are strongly supportive of this, is because they have felt targeted over the last 25 years by efforts to drive recycling as the companies that are to be targeted. And they would like to spread some of the pleasure of being targeted to other products and packages. And they have people internally that have looked at the solutions and found that extended producer responsibility is a system that can drive very high recycling rates at a very low cost. So those folks were just about at the critical mass. Here's where we might be able to use some assistance, and that is bringing aboard some retailer and consumer packaged goods companies. Now, the way you bring these folks aboard is, of course, you need to be very much aware of the costs that they want to avoid and the interests that they need to protect in doing so. We need to be respectful of the interests that they have, but we also need to bring to bear a unified ask, again, by folks in this room and elsewhere, so that they understand that there is really a high priority for this kind of action, and that is what can do it. For here, we've also identified 3 core principles in this case that also unify a very wide set of folks: corporate, NGO, funders, activists, and so on. That is, number 1, that this is an attempt to internalize the costs of products and packages. Number 2, that it be producer financed, that because producers are the ones that design products and packages, they are in the best position to reduce the costs of products and packages, the waste costs. And third, that the fund be managed by that set of industries that are paying the costs, because no one is too sure that they want to put the monies in the hands of government. Government took about $500 million from the various bottle bills last year to cover their own operating costs, and folks are not entirely pleased. Timeline for this, also about 3 years. We think that in that time period, with a unified ask by the social investor and NGO community, we can build a coalition and advance a model that will be desirable by all of these stakeholders in 2 states. We want to have it in 2 states so we have a model that can be replicated without causing industry havoc. This is one of their desired objectives, that we not have 50 different systems in 50 different states, but that they be at least somewhat compatible. And we think that we can secure passage of a multi-state model. There are a few states there that are available for this. Number 3 opportunity: cut Farm Bill water subsidies, which are responsible for agriculture's 80% share of water consumption and about 90% of water pollution. Comes from the agricultural sector. And this is an historic moment, we are told by contacts that we have in Washington and elsewhere, that the recession, combined with the unprecedented fiscal constraints that we face and political realignments, including the emergence of the Tea Party and an electorate that is tired of government spending and handouts, that we have the opportunity, with a unified ask, to begin to leverage the buying power of some of the major companies that are buying agricultural products to send the message down the line that they need to minimize their water footprint system-wide, and that agriculture has a special role to play in that. And also that it's time to begin to divert. And we think about 10% could be diverted of the subsidies in the Farm Bill, to divert them so that the companies that are most efficient in their use of water are rewarded for that, not penalized for that in the marketplace as they are right now. We think that that is achievable. And again, same basic model. Unified ask, focusing on the top of the supply chain to spread the word among the companies that are most opportune. The 4th opportunity, and this is the systemic opportunity, something that can lead to benefit across the board for many years to come. Some of you know about RELA. This is probably the most influential of the retailer trade organizations, and I think the newest too. Retail Industry Leaders Association. This is 9 of the top 10 retailers and many of the consumer packaged goods and retail brands across the country. We need a parallel, we need a sister organization to RILA, a Retail Industry Stakeholder Alliance or Shareholder Alliance, but a group that can potentially work with the members of RILA, not necessarily RILA as an organization, but perhaps that can happen, but member companies of RILA and others, to hopefully collaborate so that we can advance some of our common objectives. I found that the people within the committee process at RILA are surprisingly solution-oriented. These are folks that have been in the sustainability community for a long time, many of them, and they want to see solutions happen. So I think this is an opportunity. So this is what can happen over the long term. A RISA, Retail Industry Stakeholders Alliance, could, for example, on an annual basis, sit down with leading retailers and seek to collaborate to identify the 1 or 2 steps that could be taken in their supply chain and pass through to the global supply chain to improve human rights, to improve energy efficiency, water efficiency, to improve the social and environmental performance of the entire supply chain. I think it's an opportunity whose time has come. Now, this does require strange bedfellows. It does require that we begin to sleep with organizations and individuals that we have not found palatable necessarily in the past. But this is the highest mark of a political change movement, is when you can bring forward the integrators, the folks that we continue to follow, to find inspiration in. These are the folks that have driven society in positive directions. They come from the left and the right, but they uniformly convey a positive approach to the future. And I think that this movement can apply what they have taught us. Here's the extra credit, opportunity number 5. Just a side suggestion. The entire U.S. coal industry is now valued at under $50 billion. I think we should take up a collection. We all know the symbol for crisis in China is a combination of 2 symbols, 1 danger, 1 opportunity. We do face unprecedented danger. We are at a point of transition, and points of transition are always points of danger. But we also have more opportunity right now than we ever have before. We have the capacity to make the changes that we have begun. We don't know how to do it, but the folks that we regard as on the other side, they don't know how to do it either. Together, there's an amazing synergy that happens where people discover how they can solve their problems, their mutual problems together. We have allies that we have not even begun to imagine. And we have power that we have hardly begun to use. It's time that we began. I appreciate the honor of speaking with you. I look forward to the opportunity to work with you. Thank you very much. And I believe we have time for some questions, so I'm happy to receive any questions you might have. And thank you for that appreciation. I truly appreciate it, and that's one of the things that just provides the energy that keeps things going.
Dave Kirkpatrick, SGF Ventures. We're a positive impact venture fund. Just this idea of the shifting in the labor tax impact, the statistics that struck me recently was the wealth concentration we're seeing in our country going from the top 1% earners being 9% to now 24% of our aggregate national income. So something that addresses the payroll tax and kind of the redistribution or resetting a bit. And I know income equality or sort of social justice is not part of this agenda, but I'm just thinking aloud that this kind of starts getting at that with the pollution to a bit more equity in terms of our labor tax situation. So
it's a good point.
Great thought.
Payroll tax hits the poor hardest. It's the most regressive tax that we have. So the ability to unify with the right to reduce a tax that is hitting the poor hardest, it's more than timely. I think on the broader issue of overpaid executives, I think that there are also folks on the corporate side who realize the cancer that represents in a broader social sense. And the solution isn't among these three for that, but the solution is there, and we can find it if we begin these dialogues and begin to find out who our internal allies are.
I'm Larry Doors. I'm with New Grown Social Investment in Seattle. I have the highest appreciation for what you're talking about of being open-minded and willing to look for allies where they are, and they really are everywhere. Our company last Thursday filed a shareholder resolution at Berkshire Hathaway, and we kind of remodeled a series resolution asking for targets for reduction of greenhouse gases. Berkshire is a little bit different because they own a coal-burning electricity generating utility. And we explicitly put in the resolution a conversation about externalities. Because if you run nothing but a coal-burning electricity utility, you can rationalize externalizing your costs out onto the wider society. But Berkshire is different because they're a holding company with lots and lots of different companies, in particular insurance companies.
Yeah.
And so essentially they're looking at externalizing the costs of coal burning onto themselves. And so we're excited to be doing that, and we feel as though the opportunity is there to identify within Berkshire Hathaway allies in exactly what you're talking about, who are also looking to reduce coal burning and all the problems that causes. And I wonder whether you have some advice for us as to how we can identify those individuals. It's a very big organization. Mr. Buffett might fall in love with us from day one, but that might not also be the case. What advice would you give us?
First of all, congratulations on the strategy. I think it's a very intelligent strategy, and I think it could work. The advice I'd have is to be bold and to reach out. Certainly to Warren Buffett, to his immediate lieutenant, I can't remember his name, but to various folks in the Buffett organization. Reach out to them directly with as humble an approach as you can at the beginning. And use his words if you can. I was lucky enough to meet Warren Buffett at a sustainability conference, interestingly enough, of CEOs down south, and he said some very good things, including chastising the CEOs for earning too much money in the room. So he's got some sensibility to him. But be bold, go in, try to seek a meeting with him and with others, and be irrepressible in that process. Look for other examples of companies that are in his position to apply the same strategy to. Get into a conversation, an informal conversation. Be where they are going to be. This is the ideal, really. Find out, where is Warren Buffett speaking? Where are these groups getting together where you can have a casual conversation with him? We find that that's the best approach. Formal meetings, we're not a big fan of. Formal meetings have lawyers and have strategy and have talking points and all the things that make it more difficult to share actual ideas. But informal meetings, that's what I would suggest.
Thanks.
If that helps. Yes.
Thank you for a scintillating presentation. My name is Zachary Carabal. I run a small, sustainable-focused hedge fund, but I also wrote a book recently with Aaron Kramer, who's the CEO of Business for Social Responsibility called Sustainable Excellence. And we talk a lot about the NGO business strange bedfellow and some of the unexpected and productive solutions that have been going on in that space. But my question for you has to do with the government axis of it. And, I take a different lesson from Bob Inglis's defeat, which is government, particularly the federal government right now, as a source of action on any of these issues is likely to be a very slow and unproductive slog. And so my question is, given the degree to which NGOs and businesses and organizations that you've been deeply a part of have managed to come together for a level of solutions about both profitability and sustainability over the recent years, and even more in the past few, why continue to focus energies on government when government may not really be a productive source of solutions, but may be a profoundly unproductive use of energy?
It's a very good point, and very well taken. The basic strategy that we're suggesting and that we follow is one that can produce results either in the marketplace or in government, depending on where the opportunities are. And that's why we think it's so important to focus on that supply chain. There's no company in the world that has a greater capacity for driving consumption or driving sustainability than Walmart does right now. And the commitment that they've shown over the last 2-3 years toward their sustainability program has been, I'd say, nothing short of inspiring. Doesn't mean that they've accomplished all that they set out to, and they won't, because there are some areas of public policy that they need to be in alignment, I think, with their objectives. But they're more powerful than the U.S. Congress in terms of driving change down their supply chain. So working with the retailers like that, with a little creative tension, a little, tense collaboration, can be a very productive course. But I would suggest that the political process is constantly varying as well. And if we are not active in the political process in the next 2 years, where the chances of passing anything at the federal level are bleak at best, but we have to be active during that time, building the foundation of support within the Republican Party and within the Democratic Party for some of the changes, particularly a price on carbon. If we do that in the next 2 years, then things will change in 2 years. We don't know exactly what turns it's going to take, but we have this 2 years to build the base in the Republican Party that we need to provide the margin of victory. So I wouldn't be throwing money at legislative efforts right now, but I would definitely be investing in building that base. Only 10-15% of the Republicans do we need to actually pull over to make it happen, but they are the margin of victory for us. 2 more questions. We have 2 people there.
Hi, my name is Angie Jansen. I'm with Climate Neutral Investments, and I'm wondering how you feel regional jurisdictions and local governments can be leveraged to achieve some of the opportunities that you've mentioned. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking specifically, for example, of the carbon discussion in this country, where the federal initiatives have failed, regional initiatives like the WCI and the RGGI have succeeded. And so how do you feel that example might inform some of your topics?
A wonderful example. When we were passing legislation in California, one of our typical strategies was to pass similar measures in the various communities. In fact, one that we did said, because it was something that wasn't really appropriate for the local level but could have been done on a state basis, we crafted a local resolution for local government that said, at the point at which governments representing a total of 5 million people or more have passed this measure, it will go into effect in all of those communities. So that we could get over the problem of we can't pass a carbon tax in a little community. So I think that a little creative, strategic passage of measures at the local level can create the desire on the part of companies and others to have a state solution and then a federal solution. So I think it's extremely important. The fact that we have RGGI, the fact that we have the California system, certainly puts us ahead. And the fact that the voters of California overwhelmingly kept the system in California is a real step forward. I see there are 2 other people, and I can't choose between them. Can I just choose them both quickly?
I was first.
He was up first.
Okay, thank you. I'll help you.
All right.
My name is Giuseppe van der Helm. I'm president of Eurociv. I have a question, but before I do that, I want to share an observation. Often observations by outsiders. I'm a first-timer and a European. Well, they have some value. This conference is now a couple of hours old, and you're the third person I noticed talking about November 2nd. And it's always in the connotation of either we blame the voters, or we blame the government, or we blame ourselves. And I can understand some of your frustration. After all, I am from a country where the Prime Minister, we have a right-wing government just started 2 weeks ago, led by a Prime Minister who is a liberal. A liberal, in this country, is viewed as a kind of bad word for a very activist left-wing person. So the hope is that their encouragement is there's a world beyond what you see here as a left-wing. He's right-wing in our country. But I appreciate your attitude of saying, well, forget all about the bitching and moaning about who's to blame, but let's go beyond that and let's look for the opportunities, let's work together. My question is this: how do you manage to do that? Because you and your association, your organization, have to run, I guess, on a tight rope. I mean, how do you have to be friends with everybody, with the companies, with the NGOs, with government, although government is less important perhaps. That means that you have to remain a kind of neutrality. So my question is, how do you manage to do that? And specifically, what is your funding model, your business model of your organization?
The first part is how do we do it in terms of the relationships. The second is the funding model that enables us to do it. In terms of the first question, the answer is twofold. First, we look for systemic root causes of the problems because, and there was an interesting guy with Toyota who established the practice at Toyota when they were known for the very best quality, and I'm sure they will be again. One of the ways that they got to the root cause of problems was the 5 whys. You ask why 5 times, basically, and if you ask why you have a problem 5 times, you have this problem because of this. Why do you have that problem? You have it because of this, because of this, because of this, because of this. You usually get down to the root cause. So that's what we apply when we're facing a problem. And when you get to the root cause, you find common ground with most of the opponents that oppose you at the higher levels. So we can find legitimate common ground and stand behind that. So we're not a neutral organization in the sense of not advocating anything. We want solutions on climate, on water, on recycling, on human rights. We advocate that. And the companies that we work with understand that in order for us to have credibility, we have to be able to work with NGOs and SRIs that also have those objectives. And we need to be able to level with them about, we want a systemic solution. We don't necessarily want the battle that's been going on. We want to get beneath it and use that, leverage it to accomplish something worthwhile. In terms of a funding model, we're primarily funded by grants right at the moment, but we have we offer stakeholder engagement for companies in these 4 areas. We essentially lay out all of the different stakeholders, just as I did here, the same layouts. We lay out all the stakeholders that are involved in these different campaigns. We identify areas of potential common ground. We identify potential partners for them. Now, every company has a different set of needs, and every company can be a solution, a dramatic solution in one area. You may have a company that is fundamentally opposed to a price on carbon, but they may have an interest in right pricing of water in the agricultural market. So you go there with that company, and you go elsewhere. And those companies pay $10,000 to $15,000 to be partners of Future 500 that supports our work in reaching out to all of those stakeholders. So we're able to reach out to all these stakeholders and understand where they're all coming from and report those opportunities, and that enables us to kind of hold it all together. But I would say that our people who come from both the activist and the business community are totally dedicated to this. They live their lives for this. So that's what keeps us going. Thank you very much.